Once it gets on top, what's it going to do? Well, in my seminar series, part 6, we talk a lot about that. Noah's flood, the dangers, what would it do? Basically, it would make thousands of feet of sediment layers, because the water sloshing back and forth for a year is going to form thousands of feet of layers. Lady Di, where's that glass thing with the sand in between that you used to play with? It's in here somewhere. One of the shelves over there. Anyway, the Earth's crust would be resloped, reshaped, and shuffled around and changed over and over and over again during that flood. It would bury billions of dead animals, generally according to their density. Probably the reptiles are in one layer because reptiles have a similar body density that's different than mammals. Mammals have hair, reptiles don't. It would deposit billions of trees and plants in layers, and if they're deep enough, it presses them into coal. Coal can be made in a few minutes in the laboratory under intense pressure. It would carve huge canyons, both underwater and above water. You know, an underwater landslide can carve canyons underwater. Ask the Navy. They do all kinds of studies on that because they're always looking for places to hide their submarines. They want to study the bottom of the ocean. What's it look like to know where to hide? So the fountains of the deep broke up, launching stuff into space, which is a vacuum, and it would break the canopy on the way. The canopy would be shattered, and it rained for 40 days. The tidal bulge would become harmonic. The moon is causing the tide to be pulled up, but the Earth is turning, so that the bulge pretty much stays under the moon. People on the equator, if they could see it from off the surface of the Earth, that tide is moving 1,000 miles an hour to the west. So the water is being not only raised up and down, it's being side to side. There's lateral movement and vertical movement. The tidal bulge would become harmonic at about 200 feet, and it would deposit thousands of layers of sediments all over thousands of feet thick. Broken plates of the Earth would flex up and down and would cause cross bedding. And how do you get this pattern of sandstone? Layers this way, cross bedded. One flood in the days of Noah would do this. You can get a similar small one of these by taking a jar of dirt and rocks and sand and water and shake it up and watch it. It'll happen in your hand. You used to play with that thing in here. We need to get some more, by the way. Put that on your list again. Okay. The Bible says in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month. So let's make a little calendar here. We're going to call that February 17th. Second month, 17th day. In the year 600. Then it says in the 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering. We'll call that January 1st, 601. So he's in the ark for almost 11 months until he takes the covering off because it's starting to dry out. And it says in verse 14, in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. We'll call that February 27th of the year 601. So Noah's in the ark a little over a year, about a year and a half a month. So God spake unto Noah and said, go forth out of the ark. Very interesting. He didn't say come out of the ark. He said go out of the ark. So where does God have to be? Inside with him. King James is one of the few versions that God said, Noah, come into the ark. All the rest of them say, Noah, go into the ark. No, God's in there with him. And by the way, if you're going to go through trouble and trial and testing and problems, God will be with you through the whole thing. Wasn't God with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the furnace? The king said, I see a fourth man in there. Looks like the Son of God. And all the new Bible versions have changed it to say a son of the gods, small g. No, it was the Son of God that he saw in there. Anyway, so during the first 150 days, the water's rising up, flooding the world. Then during the next 100 days or so, the water's going down. He's in the ark for 378 days. During the last 5 or 6 months, the ground is drying out and stuff is beginning to grow again from the seeds that are floating around. Now they land and start to grow. There's no reason to get off the ark here because there's nothing to eat outside. Stay in for 4 more months. How long does it take to plant a garden and then harvest the crop? 2 or 3 months? Noah's in the ark. Everything starts growing again. When he gets out, plenty to eat. Release all the animals. See, a flood lasting nearly a year would do some amazing things to this planet. It would really reshape the surface of the planet. Mess things up big time. People don't talk about this enough in the flood geology, I don't think, but the tide would do enormous things to the earth. The tide can do great damage. At the Bay of Fundy up here in northern Canada is the largest tide in the world. I preached at a church up there. I went to see the Bay of Fundy and watch the tide come in and go out. Here it is high tide. Here's the same area at low tide. The tide goes up and down 50 or 60 feet. During spring tide, it'll go up 100 feet. Just Google the world's record tidal change. 100 feet in 6.5 hours. They surf going in on the tide. They ride the wave. They really do. The Earth's crust, even Lenox, Alabama, lifts up about 10 inches every time the moon goes over, or we spin under the moon. There's a land tide, but we don't feel it. The ocean tide you can see. Water moving up and down on the crust of the Earth would do some amazing things. We'll take a break here in a second. Water going up, a pile of water is heavy. Go stand on the beach, go walk out to Pensacola, stand 5 feet out into the water. When the waves come by, the pressure of the high spot is going to squeeze the sand grains down. Then when the low spot comes by where there's less pressure, the water goes squirting up. It's called liquefaction. You'll feel sand grains hopping up, landing on top of your feet, and you didn't move at all. The pressure's being relieved. Within a few minutes, you'll be ankle deep stuck in the sand without moving a muscle. That happens to buildings during earthquakes. The ground shakes, the groundwater separates the particles, and the building can sink into the ground. It's called liquefaction. During an earthquake, the ground became quicksand, and it half swallowed the house. Here's a whole apartment building got swallowed up by ground becoming liquefaction happening. Softening. Here's a street swallowed the guy's car. Wow. Send that to your insurance agent. Hey, the street ate my car. Yeah, right. Okay. This is still the curb. I mean, just all of a sudden the street became like soup and the car sank in. This is a phenomenon called liquefaction. It happens during earthquakes. The ground shakes and all the water comes up and the ground becomes soupy. The ground becomes like mud and not even raining. You can get a jar of dirt, sand, rocks, gravel, mud, water, shake it up, and it'll settle into layers for you in minutes. You kids are going to be taught in school that these layers of rock are all different ages. That is baloney. They're going to tell you the oldest layers are on the bottom and the youngest are on the top. Yes, boys and girls, here's the kids, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents. These layers are older. This is Propaganda 101. Those layers are not different ages. We'll talk about that after a short break. All right, let's continue now with more about Noah's flood about 4,400 years ago, 2400 BC. One of the lies in the textbooks kids are going to be taught that frustrates me to death, I taught her science 15 years, is this called the law of superposition, which is not a law at all. It's a lie. They're going to tell you that the oldest layers are at the bottom and the youngest layers are at the top. Not true. Sounds good. Sounds logical. Oldest at the bottom, youngest at the top. Not true. Charles Lyell, a lawyer from Scotland who hated the Bible and hated God and hated Christians, wrote 3 books, Principles of Geology, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. These books were what greatly influenced Charles Darwin to turn away from God. These books, written in 1830, Principles of Geology, were sent out to Darwin while he sailed around for 5 years on HMS Beagle. They would ship them out because the ship had to get resupplied every once in a while. Charles Darwin later wrote his book and tried to dedicate it to Charles Lyell because his geologic column was the basis of his dumb evolution theory. You can see Lyell's hatred for the Bible kind of oozing off every page of his books here. On page 302, for instance, he says, "Men of superior talent," he's talking about himself, "who thought for themselves and were not blinded by authority." In other words, if you guys would just think and quit believing that Bible, you'd see the truth. This is the way the atheists still do today. I've had 141 debates. This is how they do it. You rest on scriptural authority. Your problem is you're trusting the Bible. This is Lyell's writing. He said you have a religious prejudice. He said his goal was to free the science from Moses. He wanted to take earth science, the study of God's earth, and get rid of God and get rid of the stories that Moses wrote about the creation and the flood, and get people to thinking that each of these layers is a different age. So Charles Lyell's the primary guy responsible. Other people worked on this also, including some Christians. But he's the guy who made up the idea of the geologic column, that each layer of Earth has a different name, an age, and an index fossil. Maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer. We can thank Charles Lyell for bringing this lie to our schools, and all the textbooks are full of this kind of stuff. Each layer of rock was given a name: Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archaeozoic, Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, Mississippian, Devonian, Silurian. And it was given an age, so many million years old, and was given an index fossil. It's a gigantic lie. Does not exist. But they've got these charts in school. The kids will have to learn, oh yes, boys and girls, the Permian era was 299 million years ago in 6 months and 30 minutes. That's what they do. Now, it's a fact Grand Canyon exists. The evolutionists have an interpretation of how it got there over millions of years. The Christians have an interpretation. No, it formed from Noah's flood very quickly. It's a fact the earth has layers of rock. That is a fact. The evolutionist says each layer is a different age over millions of years. The Bible-believing Christians say, no, those layers are all from the flood in the days of Noah. And these guys are always trying to erase this line and make their theory part of the fact. No, it's a fact the earth has layers of rock. It is not a fact that they are different ages. The geologic column is actually the Bible for the evolutionist, and it only exists one place in the world: the textbooks. This guy said, if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. That book's right over there. There is no geologic column. It doesn't exist. But it's taught in all the earth science books as if it is some kind of gospel fact. If it existed in one place, it'd be 100 miles thick. There is no geologic column. This is one of the lies in the textbooks I cover in my video number 4 of the seminar, Creation Seminar Series, video 4, Lies in the Textbooks. Now, you can look at Grand Canyon or any canyon and oftentimes see layers of rock. The earth has layers, no question. We got them here on the property. You can go to the far east end of our property and see the layers of gravel they were digging for when they were mining this place. No question, the earth has layers. But why are there no erosion marks between those layers? If that layer sat there for 12 million years waiting for the next one, don't you think it's going to rain once in a while? And why is there no soil built up between these layers? It's just rock, 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 rock like pancakes. I think they're all formed very quickly during Noah's flood. You can get a jar of rocks, gravel, sand, mud, clay, silt, and water, shake it up, and it settles into layers for you every time. Just Google experiments in stratification. We're going to build one of those hydraulic flumes here at Dinosaur Adventureland to separate particles. You can buy these things at the store, 2 pieces of glass with sand in between. You flip it over and form hundreds of layers in seconds. Doesn't take long. Sometimes you can form mountain ranges too. Noah's flood did that. I meant to get this book. I think it's up there. Do you see it, girls? The world's most famous court trial. It's a pretty good sized black book. The Scopes Monkey Trial, they call it. John T. Scopes was accused of teaching evolution in Tennessee. He was a PE teacher, and he filled in for biology class one day as a substitute. He says, I don't remember if I taught evolution or not, but I'll pretend I did for the trial's sake. Tennessee had passed a law that said you can't teach evolution. They wanted to test the law. Well, the atheists lost the case in court, but they won it in the public opinion. Then they made a perverted movie about that in 1953 about the Scopes Monkey Trial, and called it, what was the name of that movie they made? Inherit the Wind. Yeah. Complete perversion of what the trial really was, okay? But during the trial, the atheist lawyer, Inherit the Wind, there it is, right there. He said, the lowest layers are obviously the oldest. Now stop right there. No, they're not. The first meeting I ever preached in full-time evangelism was in Union Center, South Dakota, right middle of no place. 40 people in the whole town, about like Lenox. 38 of them came to the meeting. We had revival broke out in in Union Center, South Dakota. The preacher said, would you like to go down to Rapid City and see the School of Mines? I said, well, yeah. We went about 40 miles away to Rapid City, whatever it is, and we're in the School of Mines, a museum there, and the guide stops by this geologic time chart. He said, now folks, this layer of rock right here is 70 million years old. My daughter was 12 years old. She said, sir, how do you date the layers of rock? He said, we tell the age of the rocks by what kind of fossils are in them, which is what the book says. Scientists use index fossils to determine the age of rock layers. Okay. We walked around the other side. We're standing over here. And the guide said, now, folks, these bones right here are 100 million years old. My daughter raised her hand again. She said, sir, how do you know the age of those bones? He said, we tell the age of the bones by which layer they came from. She said, sir, when we were standing over there, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the bones, and now you're telling me you know the age of the bones by the layers. She said, isn't that circular reasoning? That guide had a strange look on his face. It was almost as if he were thinking, maybe for the first time in years. He said, you're right, that is circular reasoning. I never thought of that. Date the rocks by the fossils, date the fossils by the rocks. That's how it's done. Finding particular fossils indicates the age of the rocks. This is all pure baloney. It's circular reasoning. Here's Glencoe biology textbook. On one page, you date the rocks by the fossils. On the next page, you date the fossils by the rocks. These books are all right here in our museum. This is a lie. It's circular reasoning. This guy said the intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply. We don't know why. That's what I was taught in school, so they teach it to you. Encyclopedia Britannica. It cannot be denied from a strictly philosophical standpoint. Geologists here are arguing in a circle. The age of rocks is determined by the organisms they contain. They date the rocks by the fossils, not by carbon dating, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, lead-208, lead-206. That's not how it's done. They date them by the index fossils. Ever since the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method of dating and correlating the rocks in which they occur. Apart from modern examples, which really is archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils. They don't do it by carbon dating. You find a bone and say, sir, how old is this? The first question, where did you find it? What difference does it make where I found it? Oh, we have to know where to give it an age based on the layer it came from. Radiometric dating, like carbon dating, would not even be feasible if the geologic column had not been built first. Paleontologists cannot operate this way. There is no way simply to look at a fossil and say how old it is unless you know the age of the rocks it comes from. This is Niles Eldredge, a big-time brand-name evolutionist, one of their poster boys. He says this poses something of a problem. I went to hear Niles Eldredge speak at University of West Florida. He had his slide projector set up and a screen behind him, and he's standing right in front of it. When he turned it on, it's shining in his eyes, and he's trying to see the crowd behind it. I went up and said, sir, why don't you stand off to the side here so you're not in the light? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, not the sharpest tool in the shed, I think. Okay. He said, if we date the rocks by the fossils, how can we then turn around and talk about patterns of change, of evolution, through change through time in the fossil record? Good point, Niles. He said the rocks date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. I think the lights are on, but nobody is home. He said circularity is inherent. We have to use circular reasoning. They said the charge of circular reasoning, in other words, if you get accused of this, you can handle it several ways. You can ignore it. It's not the concern of the public. It's none of your business how we do it. It can be denied by calling down the law of evolution. It can be admitted as a common practice or avoided by pragmatic reasoning. Are the authorities maintaining on the one hand that evolution is documented by geology, and on the other that geology is documented by evolution? Isn't that a circular argument? Yes, it is, Larry. Bang, you got it right on the dot. That is a circular argument. He says the oldest layers are obviously the oldest. That is simply not true. But your kids are going to be taught the oldest layers, the deeper we dig, the further back in time we go. This is typical propaganda from kindergarten on. During the flood of Noah, the tides would be pulled up toward the moon like they are now, And there should be a high tide and low tide change every 6 hours as we spin around, except the moon is also moving at the same time. So it ends up about 6 hours and 25 minutes between high tide, low tide. On an average, it changes depending on all kinds of factors. You know, the ocean floor and the continental shelf and all that stuff. But we get what's called a tidal bulge. Now, when this water is being pulled up toward the moon, where's all that extra water coming from? From the sides. So not only do you get vertical movement of the water, you get horizontal movement. Well, during Noah's flood, this is going to happen a whole bunch of times. Every 6.5 hours. 70% of the earth today is covered by sedimentary rock, means it's laid down in layers. Moving water horizontally forms multiple layers at the same time. We saw the video up at my house in the stratification tanks. It'll form many layers simultaneously. So you could get a fossil on top that's actually older than a fossil at the bottom. Think about that for 5 minutes. It is not true that the oldest fossils are at the bottom because you have horizontal movement. Just Google experiments in stratification. They have huge tanks where they run the water around and figure out how sediments form, and they form many layers simultaneously. There's a bunch of layers being formed in this tank. Google experiments in stratification. This is the beach. The water comes in, the tide, piece broke away. Guess what? Multiple layers of sand in there, formed in one high tide. During Noah's flood, the whole world was underwater, and the tides moving up and down are going to cause enormous amounts of stratification for thousands of feet of sediments. The water's rising, and then the water's going back down. During this time, there would be 230 days with 880 tidal changes. Up, down, 880 times. That's going to really rearrange the real estate down below. During the last 6 months, the rising mountains and ranges and the water rushing off and sloshing back and forth, if a mountain lifts up, the water's going to rush off and slosh back and forth until the energy's dissipated, redepositing even more stuff. I like to ask the atheists, I'll say, guys, in your geologic column, which is pure baloney, you have limestone quite a few places. Question. What's the difference between 100 million year old Jurassic limestone and 600 million year old Cambrian limestone? They're both limestone. How would you tell the difference? They would say, oh, by the index fossils. If you find a trilobite, it's probably 600 million years old. Here's a trilobite right here. Here's a replica of a big one. They get some really, really big trilobites. Okay, this is a real one, a dead one. Trilobites are index fossils, this guy says. If a trilobite is found in a rock layer, the rock layer probably formed 500 to 600 million years ago. Pure baloney. Here's a fossil of a human shoe print. The guy stepped on and smashed a trilobite. One in the heel, one in the toe. Stepped on 2 trilobites. Now hold it. How could a human with a shoe on step on a trilobite if they lived 600 million years ago? Hello? Get the Evolution Handbook. If you can only have 5 books in your library, this would probably be one you'd want to have. It's nearly 1,000 pages, and it's what, $11 or something? Excellent. Got a section on everything. Cavemen, fabulous book to have. One guy said, well, if there's a human shoe print with a trilobite smashed in the heel, that proves aliens visited the planet 600 million years ago. Those aliens will do it every time. There are some huge trilobites, and the trilobite has the most complicated eyeball ever. Each trilobite will have 2 eyes. One of the eyes will have like 1,500 lenses. The other one will have like 1,100 lenses or something. It's a different number. How does their brain figure out all these different signals coming in? Each little lens producing a different signal in the brain. It's like seeing 3,000 pictures at once underwater. He seems to do pretty good. They got pretty big. Incredibly complex eyeball on a trilobite. And you're going to tell your kids trilobites are good index fossils. They probably formed 500 million years ago. Baloney. There are all kinds of different trilobites. Some may still be alive. Like the isopod, like a roly-poly would be a cousin to the trilobite, rolls up, you know. The Mount Blanco Museum, Joe Taylor, who did some excellent work, wrote this book, Giants Against Evolution, about all the giant fossils that have been found. Giant humans, giant skeletons, $39 for the book. Get a hold of Joe Taylor, Mount Blanco. We're going to carry this in our bookstore as soon as we can afford to buy 2 of them so we can keep them on the shelf so we can sell one. But I was up in Barrow, Alaska, preaching up here, as far north as you can get. Came back, and a guy from Prudhoe, Alaska, said, Brother Hovind, would you like some trilobites for your museum? I said, yeah. He said, I mean live ones. I said, live ones? He said, yeah, we suck them into our filters all the time. We suck water out of the ocean to cool our equipment, and we catch them all the time. He sent me a jar of live trilobites. They died on the way. Fresh trilobites. They're not millions of years old, folks. But you kids are going to be told each layer is a different age. 100, 200, 300 million years. Baloney. Now, Charlie Darwin did not like round numbers. He liked to be real precise, so it sounds more scientific. He said the Wealden deposits in England are 306,662,400 years old. Oh, right, Charlie. How do you know that? You know, all over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, connecting these layers. You kids are going to be told the layers are different ages. Excuse me? If there's a petrified tree standing up connecting them, the layers are not different ages. How long does a dead tree stand up around here before it falls over? 4 or 5 years? It's going to fall down. But petrified trees in the vertical position are found all over the world. There's a whole bunch of them in Tennessee. Go up to Cookeville, Tennessee. You can see them. Dr. Ball and his team in Tennessee right there next to a petrified tree standing up. Here's me by one in Yellowstone National Park, a petrified tree standing up. They're all over the world. How on earth can anybody with 1 eye and half a brain teach that the layers are different ages when petrified trees standing up connect them all? Guys, the tree got buried in the flood, mud layers settled in around it for the next 13 months, and it turned the tree to stone, standing up. Vertical petrified trees, I think, are proof positive. North Alabama, right up here, there's a coal mine where they find all kinds of petrified trees standing up, running through 2 seams of coal. A friend of mine's a foreman up there. They dig the coal out. He said, yeah, Brother Hovind, we get trees standing up. He said, I can prove to you the layers are not different ages. There'll be a seam of coal. Way above that is another seam of coal. He said, we call it the Blue Creek and the Mary Lee Formation of coal that we go after. He said, you put together fossil A, B, C, D, E, and you can figure out clearly both of these layers of coal formed quickly. Here's sample A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. He said, Brother Hovind, I can prove to anybody if they're willing to listen. If sample H goes through this seam of coal and through this seam of rock, and sample A goes through the same seam of rock and the seam of coal down here, those coal seams did not form separately by millions of years. Maybe in 6 months during Noah's flood. You'd get a layer of trees deposited, mud on top, sloshing back and forth. 6 months later, another log mat floats over and sinks. And you get 2 seams of coal stacked on top of each other. Specimen Ridge, Wyoming has 27 consecutive layers of coal, all formed in Noah's flood. 30-foot tall petrified tree, Kettle Mine in Cookeville, Tennessee. The top of and the bottom of the tree are in different seams of coal. 1 tree through 2 coal seams. Think about that for 5 minutes, you evolutionists. Why are the coal seams nearly always found on layers of clay? Clay is a pretty poor soil to support a growth of a forest, don't you think? Those trees didn't grow there. They were transported there by Noah's flood and dumped off. Up in Joggins, Nova Scotia, they find hundreds of petrified trees standing up. Here's a kid playing on one. Polystrata fossils, they're called. Petrified tree standing up, running through multiple layers. Ian Juby, friend of mine, been up there many times. He's a creationist up in Canada. All kinds of studies on the petrified trees standing up. But they've got signs there in Joggins, Nova Scotia that says this is from the Carboniferous era 300 million years ago. You guys have lost your marbles. I found them. They're here somewhere. Here they are. If you think those layers are different ages by millions of years, you have absolutely lost your marbles. We got them. Petrified trees in the vertical position, we could spend 2 days on this, but hundreds of them exist. I think they're silently yelling at the evolutionists, idiot, idiot, no, stop teaching your dumb geologic column. Here's a petrified piece of wood in our museum running through 12 layers of slate at an angle. There's a petrified tree standing up. They found a fossil fish with the nose of the fish stuck in rock 1,000,000 years older than the head. Oh, he balanced on his nose for 1,000,000 years waiting for the rest of the rock to come in around him. I don't think so. Anyway, this petrified trees are proof, I think, clearly that the layers formed quickly, and sometimes the trees are upside down. Now you really got a problem. Remember, the Bible says the scoffers are willingly ignorant about the creation and the flood. They want to say those layers are different ages. They've only got two choices that I can see. They can say the trees stood upright for millions of years while the layers formed around them, or the trees grew through hundreds of feet of solid rock looking for sunlight. Can you think of another choice? Well, the third choice would say, well, the trees were buried in a big flood. Remember from part 4 of my seminar series, how fast was that calf going? That's a joke we tell in that seminar. Okay. This guy said, Dr. Hovind, I'm a geologist in South Africa, deep level gold mine. We have found hair and sinew 2,500 meters, 8,000 feet below the surface. Hair from an animal and sinew. He said it still had a foul, rotten smell when we dug it out. Not petrified. That was his phone number years ago. I don't know if Johann Schmidt is still his email or not. When Mount St. Helens blew up, it knocked trees down for miles all around it. Millions of trees got knocked down. Many of the trees got blown into Spirit Lake. They began floating, and as they got waterlogged, they would float in the upright position because the root end is heavier. Ripped them out of the ground, dropped them in the lake, floating upright. There are 20,000 trees stuck at the bottom of Spirit Lake. None of them grew there. None. They were blown in by the volcano. They're going to be in different layers depending on how they settled out. The same species of trees like the Douglas fir, they kind of settle out the same year because they get waterlogged the same time. They're settling out by species. Already 15 feet deep in sediments, they're going to petrify standing up. Things can petrify quickly. There's petrified firewood. The guy was chopping on it. Now it's turned to stone. Here's a mummified dog stuck in a tree in Georgia in a museum. They call it Stucky. Here's a petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. It does not take millions of years to give birth. Praise God. Okay? Here's a petrified hat. Here's a petrified pickle in the case right there in our museum. Go to the other end of the wall, other side of the wall here. Guy called me from Montana. The jar's around here someplace. If you girls find it when you're organizing, it's a busted up jar been glued back together. Save that thing. I don't know where it is. The lid is rusted off. The guy called me from Montana. He said, Kent, there's an old house out in the woods here. The roof is gone. The walls are falling down, but part of the pantry was there. And there was a jar inside. The lid rusted off, and the pickle in the jar turned to stone. Would you like it for your museum? I said, of course. Who in their right mind would not want a petrified pickle? You can see where it attached to the stem on there. It's sitting in the case right there. It does not take millions of years for things to petrify. There's a flour mill in Arkansas that got flooded. Sacks of flour were covered up back in 1910. They turned to stone. Petrified flour. Here's a petrified toadstool. A kid called me, he said, Brother Hovind, I put a bunch of acorns in a bucket of water hoping they would, sprout, and I forgot about him. He was 7 years old. Next year, the water had dried out. The acorns turned to stone. They're in the museum here somewhere. We haven't found them yet. Rapid petrification, folks. It doesn't take millions of years. The flood formed all the petrified wood we see. We'll cover more on video 6. So they're going to tell you the layers are different ages. I'm sorry, that is simply a lie. They are not different ages. God saw the wickedness of man, and the imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil. And it repented the Lord that he made him, and he said, I will destroy man off the earth. I'm sorry I made him. They were all wicked. And the earth was filled with violence, and everybody had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said, that's it, I'm going to wipe them out. God said to Noah, go build a boat. And Noah said to his boys, go for wood. We got to get some boat. I think that's what go for wood is. I don't know. So, it's interesting. Why does the earth have so much water compared to all the other planets? Not only does the earth have a lot of visible water on the surface, like really big oceans, lots of water, there's another 10 oceans worth of water inside the crust of the earth, according to Discover.com. There's still a lot of water in the earth. The Bible says he shut up the sea with doors in the book of Job. when it brake forth as it issued out of the womb. When a woman has a baby, first her water will break, and water goes everywhere. A friend of mine in Bible college, his wife is pregnant, standing at the sink washing dishes, and her water broke standing up all over the kitchen floor. She hollered, "Honey, honey, the baby's coming." He rushed in to see what's wrong, slipped on the water, and broke his arm. She had to drive him to the hospital to get his arm set, and then have the baby. Anyway, during Noah's flood, the water came shooting out of the earth, just like when a woman's water breaks. That's what he's telling us in Job 38. I think these cracks are still the places where it happened, the fault lines, the San Andreas fault, the Hayward fault, the New Madrid fault. The earth is still broken up, and some of those plates are still moving, aren't they? Yeah, earthquakes, volcanoes. There is still water under the crust of the earth. They have hot water vents shooting up. Now, there's some guys, like Hugh Ross, and I debated Hugh Ross for 2.5 hours on the John Ankerberg show. He said it was just a local flood in the days of Noah. A local flood. The Bible says it was over the mountains. Now, hold it. If the water's over the mountains, it's no longer a local flood. Secondly, if it's going to be a local flood, why would God tell Noah to build a big boat? Why not tell him to move? I think you could move quite a ways in 5 years or 10 years, couldn't you? How long would it take him to build a boat? Local flood, gee whiz. If you smoothed the earth out, made it the size of a 12-inch globe, all the water in the oceans would barely fill 1 tablespoon. Today's oceans average 12,000 feet deep. If you smoothed out the world, they'd be 8,000 feet deep everywhere. That's how much water's on this planet. The oceans are huge. When they got to the top of Mount Everest, 1953, they began to find petrified clams in the closed position. Now hold on a minute. Petrified clams in the closed position. You can walk along the beach in Pensacola and find 1 million seashells, but you hardly ever find a matched pair. And you don't find them closed. If they die, they open and something eats them, like right now. Petrified clams in the closed position. We have hundreds of them here in our museum. Did you see the box of them down there? I think that indicates they were buried alive. And they could be in mud, and they couldn't even open. They find them 11-foot oyster shells on top of the mountains in Peru, 2 miles above sea level. Here's 2 people standing there. Gigantic petrified oysters. Oysters don't climb mountains very well. How do you get petrified clams on top of Mount Everest? Mount Everest is 450 miles from the beach. Now, I don't think Mount Everest was there till the last part of the flood. The mountains rose up because of India being pushed up. One of the plates was sliding, and Mount Everest lifted up 5 miles. 5 miles compared to 2,000 miles to tip of India is nothing. What's 5 compared to 2,000? You know, just a little tiny angle. Clams open when they die. To get petrified clams closed, you have to bury them alive. There's a place in North Alabama where the petrified clams are 10 feet thick of petrified clams, millions of them. They find fossilized eggs of all kinds. Eggs are fragile, had to be buried quickly in mud. Nice soft silts and muds turned to stone. Here's a petrified jellyfish. Do you think it's possible to petrify a jellyfish? It happened. Noah's flood would do that. Just the temperature change from the hot water inside coming to the surface, within a few hundred miles of that crack, everything's going to die, and it's going to snow to the bottom because of the temperature change is going to kill things within a certain distance of the crack.